When success becomes a target, Natalie Ross was the kind of woman who made the impossible look easy. At 29, she had already revolutionized blockchain security protocols that protected billions of dollars in digital assets. Her algorithms were so advanced that major banks and government agencies lined up to license her technology. She was not just smart, she was visionary. Seeing solutions in patterns that others could not even recognize as problems, her office at Stanford research lab was covered with whiteboards filled with complex equations that looked like abstract art to most people, but to Natalie, they represented the future of digital security. She could work for 18 hours straight, fueled by nothing but coffee and the thrill of solving problems that had stumped entire teams of engineers. That was how Graham Holloway first saw her. Speaking at a technology conference in San Francisco, explaining quantum encryption to an audience of executives who could barely follow her reasoning, Graham was captivated not just by her beauty, with those striking green eyes and auburn hair, but by her mind. He recognized in her something rare. Pure genius, combined with practical application. The courtship. That changed everything. Graham Holloway was not a man who did anything halfway. As the CEO of Holloway Tech Empire, a company he had built from a small startup into a $15 billion corporation, he approached courtship with the same intensity he brought to business. He pursued Natalie with flowers, handwritten notes, and genuine interest in her work. Their first real conversation lasted 6 hours. They sat in a coffee shop near the Stanford campus, talking about artificial intelligence, the future of technology, and their shared belief that innovation should serve humanity rather than just profit. Graham seemed different from the other tech executives Natalie had met. He actually listened. He asked thoughtful questions. He treated her ideas with respect. Within 6 months, they were engaged. Within a year, they were married in a ceremony that made headlines in business publications. The wedding took place at a vineyard in Napa Valley. With 500 guests who represented the most powerful people in technology and finance, Natalie wore a custom gown that cost more than her first car. Graham's vows promised partnership, respect, and a future built together. For the first 3 years, those promises held true. Natalie continued her research while also contributing to Holloway Tech Empire's security division. Her innovations became the backbone of their most profitable products. Graham consulted her on major decisions. They were partners in every sense of the word. Then Oliver was born. And everything began to shift. The arrival of Pierce entered their lives like a gentle breeze that would eventually become a hurricane. She was a 34-year-old interior designer with platinum blonde hair, a warm smile, and an uncanny ability to make people trust her instantly. Graham hired her to redesign their penthouse apartment after Oliver's birth. Wanting to create the perfect family environment, what nobody realized was that Diane had researched the Holloway family extensively before accepting the job. She knew Graham's net worth down to the last million. She knew about his first failed engagement. She knew that he was the type of man whose ego needed constant feeding. Most importantly, she knew that wealthy men were often the easiest targets, because they believed their money made them invincible. Diane started subtly. She would stay late to discuss design choices, always making sure Graham was present. She asked his opinion on everything, making him feel like the ultimate authority. She dressed in ways that were professional but flattering. She laughed at his jokes a fraction longer than necessary, more cleverly. She began planting tiny seeds of doubt about Natalie. Nothing obvious at first. Just casual observations that seemed innocent but carried hidden meanings. Natalie seems tired lately. Is she feeling overwhelmed with the baby? It must be hard for someone as career-focused as Natalie to adjust to motherhood. Does Natalie still have time for her research? She must miss that intellectual stimulation. These comments worked on Graham's insecurities. He was older than Natalie. He sometimes worried that she had married him for stability rather than passion. He feared that she might regret giving up her independent career for family life. The systematic destruction begins over the next 2 years. Diane's manipulation intensified. She befriended Natalie, becoming someone she trusted and confided in. When Natalie mentioned feeling exhausted from balancing motherhood and work, Diane would sympathetically share those concerns with Graham, framing them as evidence that Natalie was unhappy. Diane also began engineering situations that looked suspicious. She hired a photographer to take pictures of Natalie meeting with her former research partner, Dr. Kevin Jong, at coffee shops. The meetings were completely professional, discussions about a joint paper they were writing. But in the photos, carefully cropped and angled, it looked intimate. She created fake email accounts and sent Natalie messages that appeared to be from a secret admirer. Then she made sure Graham accidentally discovered these messages on Natalie's laptop. When Natalie insisted she had no idea who was sending them, Diane was there to whisper to Graham that everyone denies affairs when first confronted. The most devastating manipulation involved Oliver himself. Diane convinced Graham to install security cameras throughout their home, supposedly for the child's safety. Then she would visit when Graham was traveling and Natalie was working late, spending time with Oliver and making sure the cameras captured her being maternal and attentive. While Natalie appeared absent, the trap springs shut by the time Oliver turned 5. Graham had been completely poisoned against his wife. He saw threats where none existed. He interpreted innocent actions as guilty behavior. His love had transformed into suspicion and resentment. The final trap was sprung on a cold November evening. Graham called an emergency board meeting at Holloway Tech Empire headquarters. But this was not about business. He had summoned the entire executive team, major shareholders, and even brought Oliver along with his nanny. Natalie arrived thinking she was there to present her latest security protocol. Instead, she walked into an ambush. The conference room fell silent as she entered. 20 faces turned toward her, and the hostility was immediate and overwhelming. Graham stood at the head of the massive glass table, his expression cold and hard. "Ladies and gentlemen," Graham announced, his voice echoing in the large space, "we are here to address a matter that affects both our company's reputation and my family's integrity." Natalie felt her stomach drop. Something was very wrong. Graham opened a folder and began spreading photographs across the table. Images of her with Dr. Jung, printed emails from the fake admirer account, screenshots that had been doctored to suggest inappropriate conversations. Even a fabricated credit card statement showing hotel charges that Natalie had never made. "My wife has been conducting an affair," Graham declared, his voice dripping with contempt. "While I built this company and provided for our family, she was betraying us all." The accusation hit Natalie like a physical blow. She looked around the room, searching for even one friendly face. But the board members avoided her eyes. The executives studied their papers. Even people she considered friends would not meet her gaze. "Graham, this is insane," Natalie managed to say, her voice shaking. "None of this is true. Those photos are from research meetings. Those emails are from some stalker I reported to security. You know me. You know I would never do this." But Graham was beyond reason. For 2 years, Diane had been building this case, creating evidence, planting doubts, and preparing for this exact moment. Every protest Natalie made sounded like the desperate denials of someone caught in lies in the corner of the room. 5-year-old Oliver sat with his nanny, confused and frightened by the anger filling the space. He did not understand the words being said, but he could feel the hatred directed at his mother. Tears streamed down his small face. The ultimate betrayal Graham presented, divorce papers that had been prepared weeks in advance. The terms were brutal. Natalie would receive no alimony, no share of the assets she had helped build. And most devastating of all, no custody of Oliver. The papers claimed she was an unfit mother due to her affair and neglect of family responsibilities. "You will sign these papers," Graham told her, his voice cold enough to freeze blood, "or I will drag you through the most public, humiliating trial imaginable. Every news outlet will cover it. Your reputation will be destroyed so completely that you will never work in technology again. Oliver will grow up reading about his mother's betrayal in history books." Natalie looked at her son, crying in the corner. She thought about the child growing in her womb, a pregnancy she had discovered just days earlier. She had been planning to tell Graham that evening, hoping the news might repair some of the damage to their relationship. But now, trapped in this nightmare with no allies and no escape, she realized that revealing her pregnancy would only give Graham another weapon to use against her. With trembling hands and tears streaming down her face, Natalie signed away everything. Her home, her company shares, her reputation, and worst of all, her son. As security escorted her from the building with nothing but her purse, Natalie heard Oliver screaming for her. "Mommy, do not leave me. I will be good. I promise." Those screams would echo in her nightmares for years to come. But they would also fuel a determination that would eventually bring Loe's empire crashing down around him. Survival mode. The women's shelter on the east side of the city smelled like industrial cleaner and desperation. Natalie arrived with nothing but the clothes on her back and a secret growing inside her. The shelter director, a weary woman named Ruth Anderson, took one look at the expensive designer dress and assumed Natalie was another rich wife fleeing domestic violence. She was not entirely wrong. For the first 3 weeks, Natalie barely spoke. She moved through the daily routines like a ghost, attending mandatory counseling sessions, eating meals in the communal dining room, and lying awake at night thinking about Oliver. The pregnancy made everything harder. Morning sickness struck with brutal efficiency, and she often had to rush to the shared bathroom while other women waited impatiently outside. The shelter required residents to look for work, but every job application ended in rejection. Graham had made sure of that. A simple internet search of her name brought up carefully planted stories about the scandalous divorce, the affair allegations, and quotes from anonymous sources claiming she had been unstable and neglectful. No reputable tech company would touch her. Dr. Patricia Webb was the shelter's volunteer therapist. A woman in her 60s who had spent 40 years helping people rebuild broken lives. She recognized something in Natalie that the others missed. This was not a woman defeated by circumstances. This was a woman gathering strength for a counterattack. "You are not crying," Dr. Webb observed during their first real session. "Most women in your situation cry constantly for months. But you just sit there with this look in your eyes like you are calculating something." Natalie met her gaze directly. "Crying will not change what happened to me. Planning will? Building a new identity, Harper." Ross was born on a snowy February morning, with only Dr. Webb present in the delivery room. Natalie held her daughter and made a vow that this child would never know powerlessness. This little girl would grow up strong, independent, and protected from the cruelty that had destroyed her mother's first family. "Your father does not deserve to know you exist," Natalie whispered to the newborn. "But someday, when the time is right, you will help me show him exactly what he threw away." Dr. Webb helped Natalie navigate the complex process of creating a new professional identity. She legally changed her name to Natalie Brooks, using her mother's maiden name. She got a new Social Security number through a program designed for domestic violence survivors. She created an entirely new professional history that emphasized her early career work before meeting Graham. The tech industry was small, but it was also fast-moving and hungry for talent. Within 6 months of Harper's birth, Natalie secured a junior developer position at a small startup that specialized in cybersecurity for medical records. The pay was terrible compared to what she had earned before, but it was enough to rent a tiny apartment and begin rebuilding. James Caldwell owned the startup. A 60-year-old entrepreneur who had made and lost several fortunes in his career. He hired Natalie because something about her resume did not add up. The gaps were too convenient. The references were too vague. But when he gave her a coding test, she solved problems in minutes that should have taken hours. "Who are you really?" he asked her one evening when they were alone in the office. Natalie considered lying, but James had been kind to her. "Someone who lost everything and is trying to start over." "Good enough for me," James replied. "Just make sure that when you rebuild, you build something that cannot be taken away from you again." The strategic foundation. Natalie spent the next 3 years working 18-hour days while Harper stayed with a trusted babysitter. She absorbed everything she could about running a business, raising capital, and protecting intellectual property. James became her mentor, teaching her the practical skills that academia had never covered. By Harper's 3rd birthday, Natalie had developed a revolutionary new encryption protocol that made previous blockchain security systems look primitive. She filed the patents under her new identity, making absolutely sure that nothing could be traced back to her old life. James offered to fund her first company. He put up $200,000 for 30% equity. And Natalie used every penny to hire the best developers she could find. She called the company Sentinel Systems, and its mission was simple: make digital assets impossible to steal. The company's first major client was a regional bank that had been hacked 3 times in 2 years. Natalie's systems stopped every attempted breach for 6 months straight. Word spread quickly in the financial sector. Within a year, Sentinel Systems had 15 major clients and revenue of $8 million. But Natalie was not building this company for profit alone. Every business decision was carefully calculated to eventually challenge Holloway tech empire. She studied Graham's company obsessively, identifying weaknesses in their product lines, gaps in their client relationships, and vulnerabilities in their supply chain. Harper grew up in an unusual household. Her mother worked constantly, but when they were together, Natalie was completely present. She read to Harper every night, teaching her daughter to love books and learning. She explained basic coding concepts to a 4-year-old who actually understood them. She made sure Harper knew she was loved, even if she did not have a traditional family. "Why do not I have a daddy?" Harper asked one evening when she was 5 years old. "It's because some people are not ready to be parents," Natalie replied carefully. "But you have me, and I promise I will always be here for you." The long game begins by year 5 of her rebuilding. Sentinel Systems had grown into a mid-sized tech company with 200 employees and annual revenue exceeding $50 million. Natalie had become known in certain circles as a brilliant but reclusive CEO who avoided publicity and rarely appeared at industry events. This anonymity was deliberate. She could not risk Graham discovering her success before she was ready to reveal herself. Every public appearance was carefully managed. She wore different glasses and changed her hairstyle. She gave interviews only to print journalists, never appearing on camera. She used professional photos that were subtly altered to look different from her old self. The attacks on Holloway tech empire began subtly in year 6. Whenever they launched a new security product, Sentinel Systems would release a competing solution that was superior, more affordable, and more innovative. At first, Graham's team dismissed these as coincidences. But as the pattern continued, they began to worry about corporate espionage. What they did not realize was that Natalie was not stealing their ideas. She was simply better at understanding what clients needed and faster at delivering solutions. She had always been the more innovative thinker in their partnership. Graham had just been better at marketing her ideas as his own. Natalie also began quietly acquiring smaller companies that supplied crucial components to Holloway tech empire. She never bought enough to trigger antitrust concerns, but she bought enough to create supply chain problems. Deliveries would be mysteriously delayed. Prices would increase just before major product launches. Quality control issues would surface at the worst possible times. James watched her methodical campaign with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You know this is going to end in open warfare eventually," he told her. "When Graham figures out who you are, he will come after you with everything he has." "I am counting on it," Natalie replied calmly. "By the time he realizes what is happening, it will be too late for him to stop it." The daughter who became a weapon Harper was not a normal child. By age 10, she was coding in 5 programming languages and designing user interfaces that impressed professional developers. She had inherited both parents' genius. But with none of Graham's cruelty or ego, Natalie never told Harper about her father, maintaining the fiction that he had died before her birth. But she taught her daughter to be strong, independent, and skeptical of people who seemed too good to be true. She wanted Harper to have the tools to protect herself that she had lacked at 20-9. Double quotes, "Mom, why do you work so hard?" Harper asked one evening when she was 12. "Because I am building something that can never be taken away from us," Natalie explained. "I am creating security for our family that does not depend on anyone else." What Harper did not know was that she was also being groomed to eventually help destroy the father who had never met her. Natalie taught her daughter about business strategy, competitive analysis, and the importance of patience when planning for long-term goals. By year 10 of Natalie's rebuilding, Sentinel Systems had become one of the fastest-growing tech companies in America. Industry analysts wrote articles about the mysterious CEO whose company seemed to anticipate market trends with supernatural accuracy. Forbes estimated her net worth at over $300 million. Graham's Holloway tech empire was still larger, still more established, still more prestigious. But the gap was closing. More importantly, Graham was making mistakes. His board was growing concerned about his increasingly erratic decision-making. His marriage to Diane was showing cracks as he discovered her shopping addiction and controlling behavior. His company's stock price had been stagnant for 3 years while competitors surged ahead. Natalie tracked all of this information with cold satisfaction. Everything was proceeding according to plan. But the most crucial element was still missing. She needed Oliver to discover the truth about what had happened to his mother. And she needed that discovery to happen at exactly the right moment. The 15-year mark. Approaches as Harper approached her 15th birthday, Natalie began preparing for the endgame. She had built an empire worth over $1 billion. She had assembled a team of brilliant strategists and lawyers. She had documented every lie Diane had told and every illegal action she had taken. Most importantly, she had positioned Sentinel Systems to make a hostile takeover bid for Holloway Tech. Empire at the moment when Graham would be most vulnerable, but timing was everything. She needed Oliver to be old enough to understand what had really happened. She needed Graham's marriage to Diane to collapse publicly. She needed Holloway Tech, Empire's stock price to drop low enough that her bid would be taken seriously. All the pieces were almost in place. 15 years of patient planning were about to pay off in spectacular fashion. The woman they thought they had destroyed was ready to reclaim everything that had been stolen from her and more. Dr. Webb, now retired but still Natalie's trusted advisor, visited her one evening at her penthouse office overlooking the city. "Are you sure about this?" the older woman asked. "Revenge is dangerous even when it is justified." "This is not revenge," Natalie corrected her. "This is justice. Graham took my son, my reputation, and years of my life. I am simply taking back what should have always been mine. And I am making sure he can never do this to anyone else." The 15-year plan was entering its final phase. Soon, the whole world would know that Natalie Ross had not been destroyed. She had been reborn as something far more powerful than Graham Holloway could ever imagine. The investigation had changed everything Oliver Holloway. He was 20 years old when the cracks in his perfect life became impossible to ignore. He was studying investigative journalism at Columbia University, drawn 2 stories about injustice and corruption. His professors praised his analytical mind and his refusal to accept surface explanations for complex situations. But the biggest mystery in his life was the one he had been living with since age 5. What really happened to his mother? Growing up, Graham had told Oliver that his mother was unstable, unfaithful, and had abandoned their family for another man. But these stories never quite made sense. Oliver remembered his mother as warm, attentive, and completely devoted to him. He remembered her reading to him every night, her patience when teaching him things, the way she would drop everything if he needed her. Most disturbing, he remembered that terrible day in the conference room. He had been too young to understand the words being said, but old enough to know that his father was hurting his mother. He remembered her tears, her desperate attempts to explain herself, and most vividly, her screaming his name as security dragged her away for 15 years. Oliver had carried guilt about not defending her. For 15 years, he had wondered if the official story was true. The breaking point came during a research project for his advanced journalism class. The assignment was to investigate a miscarriage of justice using public records and interviews. Oliver chose to examine divorce cases where powerful men had used their resources to destroy their wives' reputations. As he read case after case of manufactured evidence, paid-off witnesses, and strategic media manipulation, he began to see disturbing patterns. The tactics were almost identical to what his father had used against his mother. Corporate executives would suddenly discover affairs through convenient photographs. Wives would be ambushed in front of colleagues and family. Evidence would appear all at once. Perfectly timed and suspiciously convenient, Oliver began pulling public records from his parents' divorce. Court documents were sealed, but financial records were available. He discovered that the private investigation firm, Graham had supposedly hired to document his mother's affair had been paid not by his father, but by someone else entirely. The payment records led to a shell company, which led to another shell company, which eventually traced back to Diane Pierce. Unraveling the conspiracy, the revelation hit Oliver like a physical blow. Diane, the woman who had raised him after his mother disappeared, had paid for the evidence that destroyed his family. But why would she do that before she was even married to Graham? Oliver dove deeper. Using skills he had learned from computer science friends to access databases that were technically off-limits, what he found made his blood run cold. Diane Pierce had a history. Before she married Graham, she had been married 3 times. Each marriage had followed the same pattern. She befriended a wealthy man's wife, manufactured evidence of infidelity, helped engineer a divorce, then married the man herself. In 2 of those cases, the husbands had died within 3 years under suspicious circumstances. Leaving everything to Diane, Oliver found medical records suggesting Diane had serious psychological issues, including documented narcissistic personality disorder and a history of elaborate deceptions. He found credit card records showing she had hired the same private investigation firm for each of her previous marriages. He found death certificates and autopsy reports that raised serious questions about the natural causes of her previous husband's deaths, but the most shocking discovery came when Oliver started researching successful tech companies that had been challenging Holloway tech empire over the past decade. One company kept appearing in industry publications, Sentinel Systems. The CEO was listed as Natalie Brooks, but information about her was remarkably sparse. No photographs in major publications. No television interviews. Very few public appearances. What little background information existed showed that she had attended Stanford, studied advanced computer science, and specialized in blockchain security, the same credentials as his mother. Oliver accessed Stanford's alumni database through a friend who worked in the registrar's office. He cross-referenced graduation dates, fields of study, and advisor information. Natalie Brooks had supposedly graduated the same year as his mother, from the same program, with the same thesis advisor, but Stanford had no record of anyone named Natalie Brooks. Graduating that year, Oliver's hands shook as he realized what this meant. His mother had not disappeared into obscurity. She had built a new identity and spent 15 years creating a tech empire that was systematically dismantling his father's company. The impossible decision for weeks. Oliver struggled with what to do with this information. Part of him wanted to confront his father immediately. Part of him wanted to contact his mother and beg for forgiveness for believing the lies. Part of him was terrified that revealing the truth would destroy what remained of his family. The decision was made for him when he discovered something even more disturbing. While reviewing Diane's financial records, he found recent purchases of prescription medications that made no medical sense. She was buying cardiac medications, psychiatric drugs, and other substances in combinations that suggested only one purpose: slowly poisoning someone. Oliver broke into his father's home office. One night when both Graham and Diane were attending a charity gala, what he found confirmed his worst fears. Hidden in Diane's private desk drawer was a detailed journal documenting her plan to slowly induce heart failure in Graham, making it look like the natural result of stress and age. The journal also contained notes about Oliver himself. Diane viewed him as an obstacle to her ultimate control of the Holloway fortune. Once Graham was dead, she planned to have Oliver committed to a psychiatric facility, claiming he had inherited his mother's instability. She had already contacted lawyers about establishing guardianship. Oliver photographed everything, uploaded it to secure cloud storage, and sent copies to 3 different people with instructions to release the information if anything happened to him. Then he did the hardest thing he had ever done. He reached out to his mother. The email was simple. "I know who you are. Mom, I know what they did to you. And I know we are both in danger. We need to talk." The reunion, they met at a small restaurant 300 miles from both New York and Seattle. Neutral territory where neither Graham nor Diane would think to look for them. Natalie arrived early, her heart pounding with 15 years of suppressed emotion. When Oliver walked through the door, She barely recognized him. The frightened 5-year-old had become a tall, thoughtful young man with his father's strong features, but something gentler in his expression. He had her eyes, though. Those same green eyes that could see through deceptions and solve complex problems. They stood looking at each other for a long moment. 15 years of separation, creating a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge with simple words. "I am so sorry," Oliver said, his voice breaking. "I am sorry I did not fight harder to stay with you. I am sorry I believed the lies. I am sorry for every birthday and holiday and moment we lost." Natalie pulled him into an embrace, tears streaming down her face for the first time in years. "You were a child? You have nothing to apologize for. I am the one who is sorry. I should have fought harder. I should have found a way to stay in your life." They spent hours talking, filling in 15 years with stories, explanations, and shared grief. Oliver learned about Harper, the sister he had never known. Natalie learned about her son's struggles, his questions about her, and his growing awareness that something was deeply wrong in his father's house. When Oliver showed her the evidence he had gathered about Diane's deadly history and current plans, Natalie felt ice water flood her veins. She had spent 15 years planning to destroy Graham's business empire. But she had never considered that his life might actually be in danger. "We have to warn him," Oliver said. "I know he destroyed you, but he is still my father. And if Diane kills him, she will come after me next." Natalie nodded slowly, the irony not lost on her. She was about to save the man who had tried to destroy her. The trap within the trap, they brought Harper into the planning. At 15, she was mature beyond her years and quickly grasped the complexity of the situation. "So let me understand this," Harper said, her analytical mind processing the information. "We have to expose Diane's crimes, save Dad. Graham. Warn the board about the company's vulnerabilities. And somehow do all of this without Diane escaping or destroying evidence." "Exactly," Natalie confirmed. "And we have to do it in a way that forces the truth about what happened 15 years ago to come out." They developed a plan that was risky but comprehensive. Oliver would confront Diane directly while wearing a recording device, hoping to capture her confession. Meanwhile, Detective Angela Torres, a financial crimes investigator whom Natalie had quietly contacted, would be positioned nearby with a warrant ready to execute the moment they had sufficient evidence. The confrontation took place on a Tuesday evening in Graham's study. Diane had come home early from her yoga class, surprised to find Oliver waiting for her. "We need to talk," Oliver said, his voice steady despite his terror. "I know what you did to my mother. I know about your previous husbands. And I know what you are doing to my father right now." He laid out the evidence piece by piece. The payment records for the fabricated investigation. The medical records showing her psychiatric history. The journal documenting her murder plans. And the pharmacy receipts for the medications she had been secretly adding to Graham's food. For a moment, Diane maintained her mask of shocked innocence. But as she realized the extent of Oliver's evidence, her facade cracked completely. The charming interior designer disappeared, replaced by something cold and predatory. "You stupid boy," she hissed, her French accent becoming more pronounced. "Do you think anyone will believe you over me? I am the grieving wife of a man losing his mind to stress and paranoia. You are the troubled son of a faithless mother, clearly inheriting her instability.